So, hi everyone, we are Team Kevin. So, we are ready to start our presentation right now. So, first thing, I will introduce my teammate to you. I'm the producer, Yan Can, and Yutao is our core producer, and Pearson and Patrick is our programmer. Artists will be Yigang and Abigail. Abigail was got COVID, so she's not here today, sorry. Yeah, but she will still introduce for us with her record. Okay, and our instructor will be John and Ralph, and our client is Steven, and Steve also made building the Kevin, the whole thing. And then I will let my teammate to introduce the Kevin at Cave.
Hi, so first I want to introduce the cavern, and I want to compare it to the cave. So what's special of the cavern now is that it has, we're using the ODS model, so it will have stereoscopic view, and it features the curved screens, and it has like a really big space for interactions to happen. We're also going to be incorporating stereo sound and high fidelity audio. So it'll be more immersive and more interactive. So general introduction to what we'll be making. Our experience will be a multiplayer experience. We'll be featuring stereo sound. It'll be a quick experience, about 3 to 5 minutes. We'll have the guests like really jump into the role with like a really short onboarding experience. And we really want the guests to be moving around physically in the space that we created. And for demographic, we want to focus on amusement. So it'll be similar to an LBE experience in theme parks. We want to create this experience for people all ages above 12 years old, and we really want to enable families and friend groups to enjoy in the space and our experience. And then we'll have Patrick introducing the quarters feedback.
All right, so here are some feedbacks that we received back from the quarters. So for interaction, well, back in quarters we only had a scene, so we didn't really have much interaction in the scene. So something we thought about initially was using Vive controllers and trackers. We tried implementing Vive controllers into the scene, but then there was a technical issue with it. So we did find another way around it, and then we did implement the Valve index into it as controllers. In the future, we do plan to add the Vive trackers into it for another tracking method. Another thing is for the mechanism of the game. So a lot of things we talked about was probably doing like third-person view avatars, or like doing drag and drops in the scene for interactions. Also the things like playing with the reflection from the projectors. And then one thing we decided on to do right at the moment is implementing shooting and using flashlights to light up dark areas in the scene. Some technical issues we ran into during quarters was there was a lack of depth during in the scene, because that was an issue in the projector settings. The left and right eyes were flipped for the projection, but we got that fixed. And then at the moment, we have a very clear scene, and then very popped out 3D stereo in the scene. Last but not least, we did talked about playtesting. So we did receive feedback for try to do 1 or 2 playtests, a couple playtests, probably a week or 2, so we know how our current scene implementation is, and how what playtesters feel like, and what we should improve from there. And at the moment, we do have the Valve index implemented, as mentioned in the previous slides. They're used for shooting and flashlights in the scene. And due to the requirement, we do need at least 3 players playing the game. So we do want to implement like the Vive trackers in the future.
So as far as Cavern is a location-based entertainment, we faced a lot of stuff in the development background setting up. The very first problem we faced is the wrong graphic API. As we know, the Cavern project in Unity uses DX11, and we found out that Unreal defaultly set it to DX12. So when after we downgraded it to DX11, there is stereoscopic image in the screen, and we solved that problem by this way. And the second problem we faced is that we need to build a physical model in the display system in Unreal. So, but it doesn't support any model that has a frustum which is larger than 180 degrees. So to solve that, we've just separated the 270 degrees into three 19 degrees little small curved screen. And the sub-problem we need to face is our prompt given by the client. We need to implement an ODS system in the Unreal. So to do this, we just have, we are referring to the panoramic camera in Unreal, and as well as the implementations in the Unity project. We just have, we just differentiate the screen and have each of the screen one eyes to watch the screen. So then we faced a problem of combining the Steam VR and the in-display system together. So we finally find out a way to combine these two things together. And the last but not the least, we've faced the limit of the Steam VR controller. As we know, Steam VR only supports 2 controllers. So, and our prompt given by the client is we need to have at least 3 people. So to achieve that goal, we may use the tracker as an extra input devices. So, and there is still some features that we haven't implemented yet. The first one is that, as you can see, there is a black gap in the junction area. That is possibly because of the precision of the model that we are using to approximate the physical model isn't precise enough. So when we replace that model, we may solve that problem. And the second problem is the integrating with the Vive tracker. We need to have a toy gun and toy gun equipment to add an additional import. The third problem currently we have is a low frame rate. We currently have only 15 frames per second, but we want to have 120 frames per second. We need to solve that later. The projection, we also need to have a precise and good projector's color and alignment.
Okay, then it's our storyboard, and Abigail will introduce this part with her voice to us. I will replay it.
Our game is divided into 2 stages. The background story of the game is the player plays the role of the scientific research team, and they're assigned to explore an abandoned deep-sea area in a submarine. And the player's task is to collect unknown creatures. When player enter the cavern, there will be a welcome voice to introduce the game's background story and mission to the player. When the player completes the mission of collecting all creatures, the scene will flash a red light and play the alarm sound. And then the whole scene becomes dark, and this shows that the danger is coming, and at the same time there will be a voice that reminds the player that the submarine is enter repair mode and the controller changed to flashlight and attack mode. This brings player to the second stage of the game. Because the submarine attracts danger creatures and player need to cooperate to protect the submarine through flashlight and attack. And finally, when the player finishes the game, there will be a voice announce that the rescue team is coming and they will take them back to the ground. When the game ends, and the scene will show the protection of the submarine and the number of the robots they defeat.
And then Yigang will introduce our mechanics.
And in terms of the game mechanics, we designed 2 main levels. The level 1 is a semi-open underwater space where players can freely navigate and explore the surroundings. The controllers in player's hand can be used to aim and as well as to collect the resources or other key elements by pressing the triggers when the discovery is made. And the first level can also be thought of as a teaching level to familiarize the players with the game environment and immerse them in it. And this video is an environment overview of the level 1. And the level 2 will have more interactions and experiences. Since this is a multiplayer game, so each player will consider playing a different role. One player will use the controller as a searchlight to illuminate the dark areas. And this kind of searchlight will have physical effects to better aid the gameplay experience. And finally, according to our story background, we will encounter the mechanical creatures on our journey. So the other players will use the controllers to attack the enemies and protect the vehicle for the final victory. Next, Yuta will talk about the playtest.
So last Friday, we were able to run our first playtest, and the playtest was built around three mechanics. And these sort of shooting, movement, and flashlight are the three mechanics that we really want to test out. So for shooting, we were focusing on how hard it is and how are the players learning to shoot and how are they really hitting targets. And we found out that players found it medium to hard to shoot. And one feedback we got is that you need to shoot first and then calibrate afterwards to actually manage the shooting mechanism. However, from the survey we sent out, we actually found that throughout the levels, the players actually found the shooting experience easier and easier, although the levels become harder. And for the movement, we want to know whether it's comfortable and whether people are feeling nauseous or motion sickness when we're steering. And we actually found out that most players are comfortable with the experience. Besides, there are 2 players who felt some motion sickness, but that's mostly with the steering. And they reported that they had motion sickness with other games as well. So for the flashlight, we want to know whether it's intuitive enough. And actually, the feedback was really positive. However, we might need to do some changes with the visual to visualize the range of the flashlight and to make it more accessible and more understandable. And here is a playtest. We ran this in the test scene, and you can see there's a man shooting targets. Yeah, the stereoscope is really well, so our playtester was shocked by an object moving into the volume. Yep. And then here's our future plan. So we want to finish all the basic mechanics before week 10, and we want to test them every 1 to 2 weeks. And then starting from week 9, we're going to be focused on the sound effects and the background music. And then afterwards, we want to really polish and work on the UIs, the HUDs, and all the other minor elements. And then I'll have Yan-san to summarize.
Yeah, that's our summary. We talk about Kevin, and we'll use Unreal 5, and our guest experience would be at least 3 people, and our mechanic would be shooting and the spotlight, and we still explore more things about that. And our controller, index, and wave tracker, and I think that's the whole of our presentation. Thank you.
And we're open for questions. Hey, Steve.
I'll talk to you guys later, but just go back a few slides, and I want you to explain something the way you worded something. Keep going back. I think I know what you mean, but since you worded it this way, I want you to explain it. I'll keep going. There. Problem number 5.
Yeah.
Not first person nor third person. Explain.
Because we initially think that our game might be a first-person shooter or a third-person shooter, but actually things didn't go that easy. We are actually an AR environment, AR person shooter. Perhaps you see the camera won't move with your heads moving, and there is not. It is also not like a third person's camera that looks on specific point. It is actually a camera that is fixed in a augmented reality spaces, and you can move freely in these spaces. And your hand have nothing to do with your camera. That is what I mean. It is not neither first person nor third person.
Yeah, the video you showed makes it seem like we're on a sea ship moving around because the camera's moving pretty quickly. But then we, as people inside that moving ship, inside the cavern, probably don't need to move at all, right? We could be sitting on swivel chairs. We could be standing in place. Is there any neat reason for us to move? You started off saying you want to test moving in space, but the faster it seems you move the camera in augmented reality space, the less you're encouraging we players to move around inside that space. Are you going to experiment more with that tension of people moving in space and camera moving virtually?
Yeah, we'll be doing that on the design level. So we'll be adding more interactions. We'll spread like the interaction points along the screens. So we will encourage players to look around and walk around. And we also try to have more interactions such as the flashlight, since like flashlight has a specific range. So we kind of limit the players from just turning their head and controller around. Instead, they have to walk closer to the screens and to interact. Yeah, but we'll experiment with that more.
So the scoring system that you showed at the end mostly emphasizes the shooting section of the game. I was wondering, is there any way to validate the player's experience in the first part where you're finding new species and a way to incorporate? I mean, I don't think you want to have them do it as fast as possible, because if you want them to get used to the equipment and that sort of thing, but I was wondering, is there a way to somehow validate their experience in the first half of the game?
Yeah, we'll do that later, but like the slide that we showed of like the integrity of the ship, I think most of it we're trying to say that it's not experience that we won't make the players fail. Instead, we kind of give them a scoring system to kind of push them to really immersive experience, but we won't make them fail at all. So like the ship won't really crack, even if they like missed most of the targets. Yeah, but we'll definitely explore what you were just talking about.
Yeah, my question was sort of an extension of Mike's question. I'm really curious about what are your expectations when you get 3 people into space? What are some of the challenges that, design challenges that you foresee having to deal with 3 people trying to navigate this space? How they're interacting? How do you plan to coordinate that experience?
Yeah, so first we definitely have to run more play tests on the multiplayer experience. We've had multiple players in the space trying out our last play test, although like it was kind of made for one. I think part of the concern was like whether the players were spread out in groups, like say 2 players were getting one group and then left 1 player behind, and whether players will just be spreading out like on their own spot doing like their own things, and then they won't be moving at all in the space. We'll probably be running more play tests once we have the basic mechanics figured out, and that's definitely gonna be our biggest focus, and we'll try to do that, like push that.
All right, that's time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, we're Team Intertwined. Thanks for coming to our presentation. Our team consists of Thomas, who is our producer, Ray, who is the creative director, Angie, who is our narrative designer, Cheryl, who is the technical engineer. I'm Hannah, I'm the props designer, and Cora is our UX and sound designer. Our faculty advisors are Tom and Ralph, and our client is Stefan Kasper, who is the director of the Global Languages and Cultures Room. The space we will be working with is within the Ask with Kenner Global Languages and Cultures Room, which, for the sake of this presentation, we will be referring to as GLC. Here is the space within which our experience will be based. And now I will hand it over to Ray to talk about project goals.
Great, thank you, Hannah. So our project goal is to make an interactive installation that prompts users to self-reflect and make sure that they feel heard. Our target demographic is teenager to young adults, and it's going to be located in the GLC room in the Tepper building. So you might wonder, why telephone? Why are you using telephone as your input device? So the reason why we're using telephone is that it is intuitive, it's intimate, and also it's personal. And phone could be a form of legacy in terms of communication tool. The ideation process of the telephone will be explained later in the presentation. So this is our installation diagram. We're gonna have 3 projection screens, and it's surrounding a table, and we're gonna have a phone, which is our input device, on top of the table. The back of the room, we're gonna have 2 speakers, and we're gonna have a motion detector in front of the door. So we're gonna be handing off to Angie to talk about the narrative experience.
Thank you, Ray. When the application opens, there will be a menu screen introducing the name of the experience. The projectors will show a visual of our archive, which our experience is set in. When the guest steps onto the motion pad, the phone will begin to ring, and when the guest picks it up, a voice will greet them and begin the experience. The character will ask the guest to pull up a recording that is found in our database. And the guest will be able to use the number pad on the phone to input the phone number and dial up that recording. There will be a specific question that is recorded that they will be able to listen to. The character will then ask them to pull up a second recording to which the file cannot be found, and the guest will have to fill in the recording themselves. The guest has a choice to record the response for future guests to listen to. The experience will continue regardless of whether or not the guest chooses to have their response recorded. The character will then ask the guest the question, and while the guest responds, the room transforms into a surreal landscape. The character becomes invested in the guest, and then asks follow-up questions, and while the guest responds, life begins to grow in the room. The character will then react to the guest's responses, and then the room returns to its natural state. The character then has to leave, and that allows the guest to browse through the phone book, which is a collection of recorded responses by other guests until the guest decides to leave. Now I'll be passing the mic off to Cora to speak on how we got to this point.
Thank you, Angie. About how we got here, we have 4 important related work. The first is the game of telephone, and this is a team game that information is passed on from one person to another, and finally this piece of information just turned to another very different one. And we are inspired by this, and after we delivered this idea to our client Stefan, he suggested us that why we just use a physical telephone, and we love this idea. So a physical telephone becomes part of our installation. The second project we are referencing is Kaleidoscope, which is a previous ETC project, and we are potentially going to replace it. We learned a lot about the space itself from Kaleidoscope, and there are questions raised by faculties that what's the difference between Kaleidoscope and our project, Intertwined? Our answer is that Kaleidoscope focuses more on biases and identity assumptions and stereotypes, but we focus more on individual stories, and we want people to provoke people's thinking behind the story about the cultures. So this is the difference.
And the third project we are referencing is called Life in Greenwood. This is a local interactive media exhibition and tells the story that happens in a specific time or period. What we got inspiration here is audios and visuals can really help us enhance the experience and make our experience more engaged, immersive, and augmented. And the last one is a card game provided by Professor Brenda. After we played it, we were inspired by the questions, and we generate questions for our users, and this also helps with our narrative script. So next, Cheryl will be talking about the quarter's feedback and the technical part.
Thank you, Cora. So since quarter feedback, we have addressed some of the main issues and concerns we received from our faculty. So the first issue was the reliability of voice recognition. So we decided to limit it to simple yes/no detection or other similar form of agreement or disagreement. And then for the use of AI, we decided to go with predefined keywords and use topic modeling to trigger potential different alternative responses. That way we can add some variety on top of the already stable default experience. And then for the categorization, we're now categorizing by questions instead of the user's identities. We also added disclaimers to let the user know that they will be recorded and they have the option to opt out. And for the diversities in our database, we decided to move away from identity labels and lean into personal stories. And we have moderator and the team member will be able to generate a diverse set of responses for initiation. And then for the concerns over rotary dial, we decided to go with a push button dial with rotary aesthetic, just in case that there are users who don't know how to use the rotary dial. And this is our technical approach. So we're using an Arduino to get the telephone status and button push to the computer where we do audio processing, topic modeling, and database access in Python. And then we do event and experience flow handling in Node.js. And then the main interface is gonna be an Electron web application that displays visuals through 3 browser windows that's mapped to each side of the wall. And now I'll pass it to Thomas to talk about our progress and plan.
All right, thank you, Cheryl. I'll quickly go over our plans for the rest of the semester. So currently we have our playtest version 4. It is where the guests can experience our entire game experience within the telephone. By next week, we're planning to implement visuals, so the visuals will also trigger alongside the audio. By week 10, we're planning to integrate our experience into the physical space in GLC room, and that gives us 2 weeks until soft opening for us to fine-tune our experience within the physical space. As for playtesting, as specified by our client, he wants to take our experience to South Fayette High School, that is a local high school, and we are planning to playtest with some of the high schoolers there sometime after spring break. We are also scheduled for playtesting with Stefan's students within GLC room sometime this Wednesday. So in summary, we are planning to build an interactive installation that encourages guests to share their personal stories and make them feel heard. We're doing this through visuals and telephone. It's going to be in the VR cave within the GLC room, and our interface is mainly our telephone and the PC as a processor. Thank you very much, and we're now open to questions.
Sorry if I missed it, but so during the experience, they're talking on the phone and then the environment becomes surreal. What is what triggers that? And what is the point of that? Yeah.
So we have different stages or states for the experience. So when they're asked to do a task, there are visuals to go with that specific task. So we trigger it by whatever state the user's currently in.
My question was similar because I don't understand the connection between the question or response and the state of the room. If I ask I don't know, some kind of troubling, depressive kind of question, is it different than if it's more lighthearted? I don't know. Could you just explain that a little bit better?
So essentially, the change in the state of the room signifies a visual feedback that we're listening to you while the player's inputting their stories or what they have to say to the phone. So it won't change based on the stories, but they're gonna have a drastic change into the realm of like dream world in order to show, yes, we're listening to you. And although we can't just say like, yeah, we're listening through the phone, so we're gonna have a visual that will display that there's a change, there's a feedback about that, yeah.
What is an example of one of these recordings that I would hear?
We are going to ask questions like, what's the most important thing that happens in your childhood? Or is there a friend that you want to cut off with, you don't want to be friends anymore? Those small questions, but more related to who you are and what's your past experience.
So the recording will be someone else answering that, a previous answer to that question. Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. Hello.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the Halves presentation for Tabula Rasa. Our team is comprised of 6 ETC students, our faculty members, Brenda and Chris, and our client is Electronic Arts. So for context, our client EA has tasked us with creating a character creation system that would showcase possibilities of how to be more gender inclusive. So EA developers would also use this as a reference or inspiration for their development pipeline. What we explore and discover along the way will also be documented for future use by these EA devs. So we narrowed our problem statement down to how to focus on inclusivity via different body types paired with clothing styles and simulation games specifically. To understand the problem we're tackling, I'll take you through some of our early research. We looked at many of the games that are lacking in inclusion currently to understand where the problem lies. As shown here, most games start with a binary male-female system when you're creating characters that players have to choose from. This is an issue that forcefully categorizes players, not only in gender and body type, but usually in the clothing options that they're allowed to pick from. So we want to create a system that avoids this forced categorization and allows players more flexibility in their choices rather than being tied to a binary. We also looked at games that are more inclusive and what worked about their systems. So as shown here, there are systems that don't use a binary categorization system at all for body type, or allows players the freedom to choose clothing or accessories, regardless of what gender they might choose at the beginning. Some games like The Sims simply categorize things as masculine and feminine and then allow you to pick from whichever you would rather like to wear. So looking at these, we dug deeper to figure out what has yet to be explored in character creation that could become more inclusive for us. So after looking at the issues more in depth, we were able to establish our approach to the problem statement, which is to craft a creation system based on selecting and adjusting parts of the body and then using personality-based adjectives to offer clothing options to users. While there are games like The Sims that allow players to wear masculine or feminine clothes, one of the issues we notice is that sometimes the clothing models fit awkwardly when they weren't clearly modeled for that body type. So an example is like feminine clothing on masculine bodies, kind of like you see in this example here. So we also noticed the main categorizations are feminine and masculine for most clothing options, and we wanted to explore other ways to offer options to players that lean more into self-expression. So that's what led us to focusing on utilizing adjectives to present options to players. So since quarters, we decided our approach and began figuring out how to build our proof of concept. In order to accomplish this, we needed to explore tech solutions and problems we might encounter as we craft the prototype, determine what customizable options we want to offer to players to determine our scope, and then what we also feel is most important for the experience. And we also are going to continue to research what's been explored and what hasn't to help refine our experience. With all of these combined, we set our focus on how to present clothing options and body types to players in a more flexible way.
So for the UI UX, our client wanted a new type of character creation system. So the big question was, where does the player start? We brainstormed a few approaches, and we realized that a character is not only defined by their visuals, but also their personality, which is why our experience flow starts with the player selecting personality adjectives for their character. Then they would be presented with body and outfit options based on those selected adjectives. One of the challenges that we encountered was deciding which adjectives to use and which ones to avoid. We decided to use adjectives that are more related to the outfit style, such as studious, sporty, bold, and reserved, and avoid adjectives such as funny, strong, or anxious, because those could reflect stereotypes. For our paper prototype playtesting, we gave our playtesters a limited selection versus full selection for the character options. And the main takeaway from that was that the playtesters preferred the full selection, where they were given the character options for all adjectives available in the pool. And additionally, we're still working on balancing the experience so that we can keep simple categorizations while allowing the player to feel a lot of freedom during the character creation process.
So next, we're going to talk about the art part. Our goal here is to have, first of all, our goal here is to have a stylized base body and with multiple morph target to indicate different body types. And second of all, we're going to have a library of modern clothes designing and also simplify the 3D assets for all the clothings with marvelous designers. And for the art style choice, we go to the stylized material texture, which means we got less complicated color choice and less clothes pattern to increase our efficiency. And lastly, we're going to have a couple of idle animations or poses based on the adjective we're going to have to give a little bit of personality after players create their characters. And little update is that since we have a 3D scenes to show our character creations, we have a little stage environment which indicate less personality, like a bedroom or like a dressing room, so that we can stay neutral for the entire process.
And now I'm going to talk about some character artists. So we have different body types, and which is shown on the screen. And those body types are not only limited to like these different pictures and how much genders should there be. And also we are using this for reference for right now because we're going to create more targets, like different morph targets in the future. By morph targets, we mean the characters, they all have the same polygons, meaning if they have bigger muscles or bigger body, the polyface is only going to be scaled up instead of like having more vertex to cause more performance issues in the future. And also we simplified the characters a little bit without any facial experience, toes or fingers, to simplify this whole pipeline of character creation for ratings and for all textures. There's another set of examples, but remember, we are not going to limit our users for only 2 body types, which is theoretically referred to females or male. And we are allowing users to combine different body parts into one body, such as transgenders or biologically women or biological men will be all sections for users to put on their characters. That is an example for what do I mean last 4 seconds. So for example, they have skinny characters sections, and they wanted to have like combine a chest to the male body, and that's feasible for our potential users to create.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the technology that will be driving our solution. So when we decided to tackle this problem, clearly there are some tech art problems here that needed to be addressed. First, we needed to create a system that allows the character to respond to user-specified changes to their appearance and in order to reflect a complete continuum of physical appearances. Secondly, we needed to be able to connect the technology driving the various deformations in the character's appearance to a slider-based UI. Our shift towards a slider-based UI was an intentional design choice, which is a departure from the traditional categorization-based system that is a staple of most character customization screens. We believe this is a wise choice because gender identities exist on a continuum as a complete spectrum, and we felt that the design of our system should reflect that reality. So next, we need to be able to test out the rigs for our characters in all kinds of extreme poses and check for the quality of deformation in skinning in all possible situations. Finally, we need to be able to quickly prototype our solution and create a proof of pipeline so that we can have an ongoing conversation with EA about what can be improved or what can be tested on an early time frame. Therefore, here's a prototype of the system that we built. Is it on autoplaying? Sorry. This is to note that the body types and clothing options shown here are for demonstration purposes only, and they are not indicative of the final product. Essentially, what you see here is the character has been implemented as a skeletal mesh with associated body and morph targets attached to it. The clothing options that are visible here also have their corresponding morph targets, and they have been added as skeletal mesh components underneath the character's mesh. We are using blueprints, a little bit of blueprints, and propagating the curves to children in order to allow these morph targets to deform together. So as you can see, as the user adjusts the character's appearance through our slider-based UI, the clothing deforms accordingly. There are two main advantages to this approach. One is that morph targets can be additively customized and also independently of each other, which allows you greater flexibility in the number of actual possible physical appearances you can assign to your character. Secondly, this particular system is easily extensible, meaning that once we have the final character mesh and rig in, it is quite straightforward to add new clothing options and test out their fidelity in a relatively short amount of time. We will be connecting with technical animators and riggers at EA to further refine and improve this pipeline, because our next step is to build out the final animation rig and start out by testing idle and other animations in engine. Oops.
So we are using Unreal 5.1 based on blueprints, and our main tech issue right now is morph targets, UI design, data structures, and semantic cameras. We're using sliders to control with the morph targets values, so when we slide in the sliders, we can change the body type. And we use different widget blueprints to accomplish different character editing pages. And we also use data table, data structures to store skeletal matches, pictures, and personalities correspondingly. And we use a camera with timeline to be animated around the characters so we can add some dynamic feeling to our editor. I also put read input from mouse and convert it to the rotation of character. And I will show you here. You can see the semantic camera is moving, and I add a head camera so the player can better see the face details when they're editing their face. The reason we choose 5.1 over 5.0 is the 5.0 will restart the animation if we change the master or leader skeletal mesh, so that it's not as smoothly as the 5.1.
So currently we're at Halves, where, as we've shown, we've begun tech prototypes and UI paper prototyping. Between now and finals, we'll wrap up the prototyping with some more playtests of revised UI mockups, implement the UI into Unreal, continue modeling the remaining body types as well as the clothing assets, and create the idle animations, and then gain more feedback from playtest day and softs. So by finals, we will have the proof of concept prototype, as well as the completed documentation for the EA devs. So in summary, we are at Tabula Rasa. We are working with our client Electronic Arts to create a character creation system that focuses on inclusivity via body types paired with clothing styles as a proof of concept for EA devs to use as reference or inspiration in their development pipelines. And we are now taking questions. Thank you.
So what are you using to simulate cloth in Unreal?
So like basically I created the clothes in Marvelous Designer, and then we just retopple it and then put it in Maya. Use same like morph targets function in Maya, and then just like import it in Unreal. That's a
Are you
workflow.
re-simulating in Unreal?
I can take that question. So as of Unreal version 4.14, it seems that they removed the compatibility of cloth-based simulation with morph targets, and we need to continue to test to see if that issue has been patched in 5.1. But it is something we have assigned as a stretch goal to ourselves, because this project is really more about innovating on how we design and present the options to players, and less about our technical solutions to handling this many options.
So I really like the work you did to see what's out there, what works well, what doesn't. So how would you say what you're building is very different from those, or building upon those at least?
So the biggest differences that I think what we're trying to expand more upon is, one, I think leaning more into, I guess, like the self-expression part of it with the adjectives, because again, a lot of options that are presented to players are very much based around masculine and feminine. And while we're definitely not trying to like get rid of that, because that is very much a part of style, there's a lot of other elements to it and of like self-expression in general. So we're trying to lean more into that rather than just sort of throwing all of these options at players and having them like sift through all of it. We're trying to curate it a bit more. And then also with body types, I think we're trying to explore that more, because obviously there's like technical elements to it where it's like, obviously it's easier if you have set body types to create models for them, and that is kind of its own issue. But we also want to make sure people feel like they have more flexibility to really create their own body type without like 50 million different sliders to do very small details. So.
Hey, so I like the solutions you've come up with. One thing I'm wondering is, often gender is signified not in terms of just the choice of clothing, but how you wear the clothing. And so I was wondering, like wearing oversized shirts as dresses, having things hang off your shoulders, wearing belts in weird ways, rolling up your sleeves, like that kind of stuff. That seems out of scope for your project, but I'm wondering, are there ways you can convey that to EA in terms of talking about different ways to wear gender aside from just choice?
I think probably right now, the way we're kind of looking at how people wear the clothing isn't, I guess, so much in those small details, so much as we're looking at kind of the idle poses of like, the adjectives will also play into the poses. So like if they feel really confident like in wearing something, that maybe that's how they stand. I think we're looking more at that in terms of scope and like how the player character can like see that.
So are you manually making all these morph targets for like the large matrix of characters, or is there some innovation happening to make that process more doable?
So a little deeper dive into a process is essentially a lot of the meshes and body types that you saw on screen, they act as extreme ends of our sliders, in the sense that if we were that they define the maximum possible limits of the level of customization we allow to players. So, for example, the one on the left would be one extreme end, and the one on the right is the other extreme. And so we would have, for the clothing, we would have corresponding morph targets for either extreme end, but through blueprinting, through some scripting in blueprints, we are able to make the morph target sliders move in conjunction with one another, so that both the character as well as the clothes they're moving, they deform in tandem with each other at the same time, so that all styles of clothing fit all body types, which was the goal of the project.